Welcome back to Amplifying Our Voices. I'm your host, Patty Hayak. Thank you so much for being here. My next guest is Noemy Sanchez, a first-gen Latina who's stepping into spaces that her family would have never imagined. Today's episode is for every first-gen kid who ever had to translate at the doctor's office, figure out going to college alone, or being the eldest daughter. Let's dive in. Hi, Noemi. Thank you so much for meeting with me today so we can learn about you.
Thank you so much, Patricia. It's an honor.
I like to start with, where does your story begin?
I am a first-generation Latina raised by immigrant parents. Both my parents were born in Mexico City, and they didn't grow up with, the same resources I did. My dad only made it to a junior level of high school education. My mother only made it to middle school and wasn't able to finish. And for them, that was because education came second, putting food on the table came first. And so, we grew up with very humble beginnings. They moved to the US, and my dad has worked just about any job you can imagine, from construction, manufacturing. My mother grew up cleaning houses, working in kitchens. So very manual labor, but they are some of the hardest workers I've ever met, and their work ethic was something that they passed down to me. Spanish is their first language. It was mine as well. And so growing up, for me, my voice was their voice as well. If we were at doctor's appointments, I would translate for them. Homework. I remember so many times, second grade, first grade, I'd be bringing homework back at home. And if I had a question, I remember sitting down with my dad at the kitchen table, and he'd pull out his dictionary and translate the questions from English to Spanish just so that he could better help me with my homework, even though it wasn't in his native language. And it was those experiences growing up that really showed me the importance of my voice, how much power it held in terms of it being a representation for me, but also being a voice for them as well, for my parents and for my younger siblings. So I guess from that upbringing, I early on developed a passion for storytelling and also representing my community. Because it wasn't just them. It was also if I was ever with my tias or with my grandma, it was always just being a representation for them, moving in wherever I could ever help them in any way.
Thank you for sharing that. You're speaking to what a lot of first-generation Latinos experience
Yes.
in their childhood, where you're talking about the translating for them and then being the oldest as well. That comes with another set of responsibilities. Can you talk a little bit about that experience, what it was to be the eldest daughter, and what challenges or even some good things that maybe came out of it that shaped who you are today?
Being the oldest daughter has it's such a beautiful experience, because I wouldn't be who I am today without that being part of who I am. But you are the first in many spaces and many settings because nobody before you has. For example, I remember in high school, as I was going through the years trying to figure out how it is that one makes it to college, my parents always told me higher education is important, but they didn't know how the system worked here to make it to college. They couldn't tell me what a GPA was, what a school ranking was, to no fault of their own, of course. But those were things that I had to find out myself, why they were important. Why were AP classes important? A dual credit, the SAT, why is it so important? And so it started off with that in high school, just having to learn through just asking questions, having to be vocal about what it is that I wanted, and asking for that help. And so whether it was guidance counselors, whether it was friends who did have parents who knew how the system worked, ultimately that is how I was able to make it to college, just by being vocal about what I wanted. And then once I was in college, being first generation, I was the first one in my family to make it to that level of education. And so I was stepping into that new scene, but I was also exposing my younger siblings and my parents to that world as well. So it's just a lot of navigating a lot of uncharted territory that you don't know what you're walking into, and you don't really have anyone to tell you what it's going to be like. So it's kind of a fake it till you make it. You're just stepping into these settings, you're figuring it out as you go. But I feel like going through those experiences really has made me just continue to be persistent and very, very vocal about what it is that I'm looking for or what it is that I need or want. I'm not shy to ask for help because honestly, I wouldn't be where I'm at today if it wasn't for me being vocal about those things. And I feel like sometimes we don't want to bother or we don't want to seem like we don't know what we're doing, but it is okay to ask for help and it is okay to ask questions because I always think, closed mouths don't get fed. And so for me, it was very much a situation of to progress to the next level, you have to be vocal about these things. And I'm very proud to be able to have opened those doors for my parents and then for my siblings as well. My sister, she is now second year of college, my brother first year, and being able to be that resource for them to where if they needed any help with their FAFSA college applications, they didn't have to ask anyone else because I could be that help. So I would say, yeah, being the eldest daughter definitely just made me more vocal and outspoken as I am today.
Yes. That's great. I think that's wonderful because it's giving you a skill that's very
Mhm.
important in the workforce, I believe, which is being able to
Mhm.
advocate for yourself. And you're from a very young age learned how to advocate for yourself, which I think that is amazing. Now, tell me,
Yes, thank you.
did you always know that you wanted to go into the field of journalism?
The funny thing is that I wish I had that story where you was doing news reports in my room since I was 5 years old, and I always knew I wanted to do this. But for me, realistically, if I'm being 100% honest, I figured out this is what I wanted to do in high school. I was actually supposed to go into environmental engineering just because it sounded cool. It dealt with trying to better our environment, our systems, water quality, but I'm horrible at STEM. I suck at math, I suck at science, and any journalist can tell you most times we're really good at writing, but when it comes to that other with STEM, a lot of us struggle. At least from the spaces I've been, it's a very common knowledge. But for me, the way I actually kind of stumbled across this, it's funny. I was in Dallas and I was going to a Lana Del Rey concert, and the American Airlines Center where the concert venue was at is literally right beside Channel 8's studio. And the way they have it set up, or they had it set up, was where you could their walls were glass, so you could see the live broadcast happening. You could see the cameras moving. You could see the anchors literally reporting the 6 p.m. news or the 10 p.m. news. And that day, I remember we were waiting in line to go into the concert. And to my right, I'm seeing the news production going on. And I see this one anchor step up behind the anchor desk. Her name is Cynthia Isaguirre. She's still in Dallas working for Channel 8. Cynthia, she's Latina too. And I remember when she stepped onto the anchor desk, she just held so much power and so much grace and authority. And I remember in that moment when I saw her, I was like, that is such a cool job. And I don't know, something inside me like flipped where it was like, I would love to someday be able to present myself with that much grace
Hmm.
and authority and responsibility. And I feel like that was kind of like what lit the flame to me really going down the tunnel of like, what is a news anchor? What is a journalist? What all do they do? And lo and behold, by the time I went into my freshman year of college, my bachelor's degree was for broadcast journalism. It's so cool to now be able to say that my job is doing what I envisioned, and now being able to say I am a journalist, and whenever I do go live for broadcasts, I can say I do stand behind the camera with that confidence. It's a really cool, like full circle moment, I will say. But yeah, we're here.
It's amazing. Thank you. Can you talk a little bit about getting your foot in the door and what your career path has
Mm.
been like?
Yeah, so for me, it started very much in college. It was very critical that I got involved in organizations that were broadcast related. So as soon as I went into college, I started going into organizations that made me practice my on camera presence, where we did like student newscasts and student reports. So That was kind of a way for me to practice my presence, even when I didn't feel very confident about it or I didn't know what I was doing. But for me, the doors opened up where I used my differences to my advantage. So at school, we had English and Spanish broadcast stations, right? The English one was always super full because everyone was auditioning for being a news reporter broadcasting in English as a student. But Spanish, it had way less students because not everyone in the School of Journalism could speak Spanish. There were a lot of times when I would audition for roles in the English news and then would get turned back because it was just full. And so um, I would then start doing the Spanish broadcast just to get my practice in. Even though I knew maybe English is what I wanted to do, I would practice because that is where the doors were opening at. And from that experience, eventually the opportunity came to where I was able to intern at Telemundo. And it was a Spanish internship with like the Spanish reporters. But like I said, it gave me the experience I needed. And I was able to use that for both. And then I was able to go to DC and intern at Capitol Hill with the Washington News Bureau. And so being able to use my differences as being a Spanish speaker, being Latina, tan skin, dark hair, I use those things very much to push myself forward instead of holding myself back. And then once I got out of college, I had just such a resume of experience, which had I not taken advantage of my skills, wouldn't have happened. And that led to me getting my first job out of college as a evening news anchor for the 6 and 10 newscast, which is honestly not very common, especially straight out of college. Straight out of college, typically in journalism, you are going into a reporter role. But thankfully, I was able to get to that next level where I was able to anchor straight out of college.
That's amazing. Talk about using your Latinidad as a strength, right? That I love that. Can you tell me a little bit about this powerful story that you share about someone doubting you going into this field? Where they're like, are you sure you want to step into this field?
Yeah, well, when I told my family that journalism and specifically going into broadcast journalism was what I wanted to do, everyone was pretty receptive of it. But there was one Christmas fiesta we had, and my cousin, he came up to me and he asked me, "Cousin, May is coming up. You're graduating soon. What are you planning to do?" And I told him, well, I want to do broadcast journalism. I want to be a reporter. I want to be a journalist. And he told me, like, on TV, like a news anchor. And I was like, yeah, that. I remember seeing his face and there were like a lot of thoughts going on. And I asked him why. And he told me straight up, I don't think you're what they're looking for. And I asked him, I was like, what do you mean? And I remember the next things he said were, well, you don't look the part. He was like, every time you go watch the English news, there's blonde, blue-eyed woman. And that's what they want. And you're not that. And not only that, but they don't even have to look at you to know that you're not what they want. When they see your name, that'll be enough to tell them. I remember he told me, when you apply for a job, they're going to see Noemy Sanchez. Noemi is clearly an ethnic name. Sanchez is clearly a Hispanic name. Who do you think they're going to pick out of a list of applications? If they see Sandra Smith or they see Noemi Sanchez, who do you think they're going to pick? And I remember by this point, I was I was a little frustrated because I hadn't had anyone genuinely bring this up as a concern because I myself hadn't seen it as a concern. And I told him, who are they going to pick? Tell me, enlighten me. And he was like, well, Sandra Smith, because why would they take a chance on a Noemi Sanchez? They don't know if you're going to come in with an accent. They don't know what you look like. Why would they give you a chance? It was just really sad seeing my own cousin, who is part of this Latino community, bringing the Latino community down.
Right.
And I'm so glad that for me, that experience didn't deter me, didn't bring me down in any way. But, sometimes I wonder, like, what would it have been if I had let his words get to me? What would it have been like had I just said, you know what, he's right. And, the funny thing is that I still think about that conversation because to me at this point, it's just ironic because now
Right.
I have been able to be a Latina news anchor with black hair and tan skin
Yes.
and black eyes.
Yes.
Like, it's just so ironic now that I think about it. And the fact that, like, my name in no way has deterred those opportunities. You can't let people tell you what you can and can't accomplish. The only person that does that is you at the end of the day. And that to me has never been something I've looked at. My Latinidad, where I come from, has never been something that I look at as like a disadvantage. To me, it's always been an advantage because I don't know that in a lot of spaces I've entered, a lot of people, want professionals that are Latinos that can speak Spanish, that can be that representation. And that to me has been my experience of, it is a plus and it is a bonus, and we are wanted in these spaces. Now, is there a hiccup here and there when it comes to, representation? Yes, there is. But that's why our voices are so important in these professional settings, because if we're not in them, sometimes there isn't anyone else that is advocating for the voices in our community. Not to any fault of their own, it's just because they don't belong to the community. So sometimes they're not aware of the things that
Right.
are, going on in our Latino community, our struggles, the stories that maybe need to be told. If there has ever been any doubt coming in from any other people, I just say the biggest thing is not allowing that to impact you because, like I said, at the end of the day, it truly is, it's up to you. So,
Right. I appreciate that your cousin came from a place of love and concern, right?
yeah.
And at the same time, we can't take advice from people who haven't been in spaces that you haven't been in. If you would have listened to him, you could have let
hmm
that get to you and not pursued
Yeah.
this path, but you didn't let that and you continued
hmm
going. So thank goodness you
Yeah,
didn't listen.
yeah. And like I said, I know it didn't come out of like a place of malice. I think it was more
Right.
so just concern of like, are you sure?
Right.
But still, I remember I told my dad that night, and he was like actually very bothered. But it's just sometimes like people themselves are scared of what they don't know.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, but we can't let that stop us.
Absolutely. Now, tell me a little bit about that big move from Texas to Tennessee, because are you the only one in your family here in Tennessee? Like,
Yeah,
we're close to family. It's a big
yeah.
culture. How was that leaving your family into a
hmm
brand new state where you know nobody, and here you are?
It was hard, especially when I was still in the job application phase, and I knew this opportunity here at Channel 6 was pretty much a solid. I remember there was a moment of panic for me where I did think, like, I don't want to leave you guys. But my dad and my mom were honestly the biggest supporters of me moving here. As hard as it was, the way they framed it to me was, "You don't want you to stay here and miss out on your potential future." It's just like, the reality is they're there. They're always going to be there. We're going to be a little further away. And I feel like in a way, coming from a Latino family and being the eldest daughter, you're pulled into a lot of family responsibilities when you're at home or when you're nearby. Parents need help doing taxes or need help with translations or need help with anything. Like, you are the go-to person,
Hmm.
right? And sometimes that kind of takes you away from what you are doing with your own life or with your own job. And so I feel like this move has been good in terms of like it has helped me branch out into my own person, really have a new level of independence, but in a way for my family too. It has, and I mean this with all the love in the world, but it's also kind of like in a way pushed them to become more independent as
Right.
well,
Mhm.
because I'm not there to go do a lot of the small things that typically they would call me to do. So it's been a good change for both of us. Anyone who is first generation eldest daughter or son, I'm pretty sure can relate to the fact that your parents and your siblings become dependent on you on certain things that maybe they could potentially do themselves, but because you're there, they just they just rely on you. And so I feel like this change has been good for both of us. Obviously it's hard, and I think my long-term goal someday is to come back home, just because I mean there's nothing like, you know, having your family nearby, the carne asadas on the weekend, the fiestas, the
Right.
bautizos. You really do miss a lot of that. And especially coming from Dallas, Fort Worth, where the Hispanic Latino population out there is way bigger than it is here in Knoxville. I feel like sometimes you do miss knowing those parts of towns where you're going to find the best tacos in town. And it's not just going to be one taco stand, it's going to be like the whole side of town.
Right.
Las panaderias, any corner you go, the huge panaderias. Sometimes you do miss the things of home that sometimes aren't necessarily replicated everywhere. Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about any moment where maybe you have felt that you didn't belong or imposter syndrome.
hmm
So talk to me a little bit about that.
One of my biggest quotes is "fake it till you make it." That came from my therapist that I had back in my first job out of college in Tyler, Texas. Um, and the reason that stuck so much with me was that being an anchor, you at least externally have to be on all the time. Because if there is doubt, if there is a mistake you make, people are seeing it. While I was broadcasting 6 p.m. news, if I slipped up on a word, that is happening live.
Mhm.
So I feel like for me, I mean, I want to say first and foremost, I think it's normal to not always feel on, and it's normal to, especially in your first job, to have imposter syndrome. I will be honest about it. I had it mostly the 2 years I was out in Tyler, and it was because it was my first job out of college. And the first job out of college typically is the one where you are making mistakes, you're learning from your mistakes, but it's harder to do it when you are on fulfilling a role that is typically given to that have been in the industry for years. And also being a 22-year anchor that was giving the news to people that were my parents' age and my grandparents' age. For me, I think what was really hard at the beginning was getting over the fact that like I was young and I didn't want people to watch the news and see a 22-year-old on their screen and immediately turn it off because they're thinking, what the heck is she gonna know?
Mhm.
There were
Right.
many times when at work we would have our 2:30 meeting, which is to talk about all the stories that are going to be going on for the 6 p.m. news and the 10 p.m. news. And I remember there were so many times when we had like all the reporters and all the other anchors sitting in on the meeting and talking about the city council meeting, the agenda, the construction of the new bridge that was happening in town, and the new court cases that were coming up. I felt the most imposter syndrome when I was in those meetings because sometimes we'd be talking about property taxes. As a 22-year-old who does not own a home, I was listening and I was nodding my head because I didn't know. And the beauty of the industry is that sometimes, even though you don't know things, you learn it and you learn it to a T to then share it with people, right? But
Mhm.
it's that initial, just fear of like, I don't know what you're saying. You're talking property taxes for this evening news story, and I have no idea what you're saying. And so, for me, many times I remember sitting in those meetings and I was like, oh, I hope they do not call on me. Because if they do, they're about to find out how much I really don't know. And this is just me being completely honest.
Right.
I think there was a lot of pressure of being also like many times the only Latina in the room, trying to also like put my best foot forward for my community and
Right.
not wanting to, make us take a step back instead of a step forward. So I would say, yeah, that it was tough. But for me, just showing up every day, even when I didn't feel my most confident, is what paid off. I feel like that first job is always the toughest, but it does get better because I feel like after that experience in Tyler, once I went through all the emotions, I went through feeling my least confident in that role, even though when you saw me on TV, you would have never known. Now, prepared me for this job to really step up to the responsibility and know that I don't want that anymore, and that I do have a voice, I can be confident, and I will be confident. That has allowed me to now, here in this job in Knoxville, to show a completely different face and be authentically myself, because I've come from a place when I didn't feel that way. And
Mm-hmm.
I know what it feels like, and I got tired of it. And so, I don't know. I guess the best advice I could tell people is that it's okay. It's normal. And I feel like going through that also made me learn things about myself. I was telling you about those 2:30 meetings where like we'd be talking about a bunch of different things. I feel like those meetings and the way they made me feel also kind of made me internally look inside and see, why is it that I feel very uncomfortable with about these topics? Why is it that I just sometimes can't seem to find myself passionate about the city council agenda? I was able to realize that it was because when it comes to journalism, for me, the stories that I am most passionate about are the stories that make people smile, the stories that make people feel something, which had I not gone through those emotions of being uncomfortable, it wouldn't have made me look internally and see, why is that happening? And I wouldn't be where I'm at today. Now I'm working in the morning show, which is more so lifestyle entertainment. We do a lot of happy community stories, meeting a lot of, talented small business owners that are contributing to the community in such a creative way. And I was able to be in this role now from making that realization in my last job of like, I don't think hard news is my beat, and that's okay.
Right. Yes, absolutely. That's so important. I love that you mentioned that, because sitting in those uncomfortable feelings is important. And then having that self-reflection and going inside and internal and asking yourself those questions. Why is it that I don't like this? Okay, light bulb moment. And now you know which
Mm-hmm.
stories you like.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Can you share a moment when your identity as a Latina became a strength in your career
Mm-hmm.
rather than a challenge?
So I'm going to share a story, and it was a strength and a challenge at the same time. Our voices in these professional settings are so important, because if no one else in the room is aware of a certain problem that is happening, let's say in the Latino community, in the immigrant community, you are that person that can speak up for that. And back in my previous station, there was a story that came out of a man from Longview that had been, he was a barber. He was a 25-year-old barber that worked in the community, and he had been deported to Secot, which is the one of the most dangerous prisons recognized in the world. That's in El Salvador. And it was a big national story when several Venezuelan immigrants were sent to Secot. And the fact that there was a man from our community, from East Texas, that was one of those impacted individuals, I immediately knew that was a story we had to tell. We had to let people know that this story you're hearing on the national news, it's happening here. It
Mhm.
happened to a man in this community. And the mother, she was all over social media, and she had talked to some of the national news outlets about the fact that her son, or what she alleged, her son was innocent. She was talking to journalists, telling them, my son has never even had an encounter with authorities here in Venezuela, and neither did he back in the US. He wasn't documented, but she was arguing there's a difference between an actual crime versus a civil crime. And so I knew I wanted to cover this, and so I started gathering all the pieces. I got in contact with the mother. I got in contact with DHS to see what evidence they had and what their reasoning was behind deporting this Venezuelan man to Secot. And so, and then I talked to a nonprofit that was helping a lot of the Venezuelan mothers that were fighting for their son to get out of Secot, fighting to see why they were there, under what allegations they were sent there. So I was able to get all these sources. I looked in county records to see if the guy from Longview that had been deported to Secot had any criminal record, and it all came out blank. And the mom was able to send documents from Venezuela that also showed that not even a traffic violation. Meanwhile, when I reached out to DHS said that they deported the man from Longview under basis of him being part of the Tren de Aragua gang. When I reached out to see what evidence they had, what, if any, evidence they could provide to support those allegations, they went silent. No response at all. My responsibility as a journalist is to be able to get the perspectives of all these sources and put them into a story so that you can decide, so that you can form your opinion. But here we have DHS with the allegations, no evidence. Here we have a mother with allegations that her son is innocent and evidence. We typically would fill out a form that's kind of like our pitch. Like if we're wanting to pitch a story to cover, we fill out that form. I was like, you know what? I have all the stuff I need. That's going to be a good story. I'm going to fill it out. There's no way they're going to say no to this story. I filled it out in the morning, and by the time I came to work that afternoon, I see my email and I see we're going to pass on this story. And I just remember had to contain my tears of anger because this wasn't the first time something like this had happened. When it was a story touching on immigration that I had been told no to. And this being at that point about the second or third time that had happened, I was just disappointed. And I remember I had to go have a talk with one of my managers and ask him why. Why are we not going to cover this? This is a good story. It's being covered at the national level. Why are we not going to do it? I have all these sources for you. What is it that is making it not newsworthy? Because I know it is. And the explanations they gave to me just were not good enough on journalistic standards. On at least, I'll say mine. Under my journalistic standards, the answers I was given, I was like, that's not enough of a reason to tell me that this isn't a good story, that this isn't newsworthy. Some of the reasons were, well, we can't trust what the mom is saying. How do we know that what she's saying is true? And it's already been covered at the national level. So why are we going to cover at the local level? Why not? And I went back and forth. I had a fight for that one. I came out of my manager's office crying, bawling, like we were going at it because I just could not take the reasonings I was given. If I was given good, clear, concise answers that made sense, yes, I would have backed out of it and I would have been like, you know what, you're right. Maybe not right now, but they weren't good enough. At least not in my heart. I knew that it was not right. That this individual whose life had been impacted in such a, immense way, that story deserved to be told. And so we went back and forth. I was like, you know what? Use me as a resource. I am here telling you that this is something that is going on in the community, that this is something real. Maybe it's something that you don't have a perspective into because you're not part of this community, but use me as your Latina, Spanish-speaking journalist to tell these stories. My manager, he finally said, you know what? We'll do it. And he guided me through, I guess, how to put the story together to make sure that it was as journalistically accurate as it could be. And I appreciated that so much. That is what I had wanted, that guidance to put a good story together, especially with one like this. And when we put it out on Facebook, when it aired on social media, it blew up. I'm talking people were in the comment sections, back and forth, regardless of what their opinion was of the story, people were talking about it. And to me, it showed that if people are getting riled up about a story like this, it was worth it. People were having conversations about it. And after our coverage, other stations in the market started picking it up too. Months later, the man that was deported to Secaucus from Longview, his mother actually spoke to the government of El Salvador advocating for her son. And she was able to use the stories that were covered on her son to be able to advocate for him. And months later, her son was released. And I can't tell you, just as a journalist, sometimes you put a story out there and you see people talk about it, but you see it happen, but you also, it's like a tangible, sometimes you don't get that. And when I saw that, that is the power of journalism. That is the tangible impact and effect that telling these stories can have. Going back to the original question, that experience for me was one where I had to put my foot down advocate for the community and advocate for journalism and for a story that had value. And I had to put my best foot forward, even though I was scared. My voice was shaky when I was, talking to my manager about all of this. I was bawling, but like I said, it was worth it. It was worth it because the story got told and good, things came out of that, impacts that changed people's lives after that.
That's such a great example of, to your point earlier, about being that Latino representation in the room that is close to your community, you know it, and being that voice advocating for the community. So kudos to you, and then the amazing impact that you had on that as well. If little Noemi could see you today, what would you tell her?
And this is something that I still tell myself till this day. If it's not you, it's going to be someone else. So why not let it be you? Sometimes we feel like to achieve our dreams, we need to have everything aligned. Resources, support, feeling confident in the moment or feeling the motivation. But realistically, none of those things have to be present. You just need to go ahead and do it. And I like to think that believing in oneself's ability to achieve your dreams is honestly all you need to get the ball rolling. There could be many women out there who could be in the position that I am today here at Channel 6 that could have been in the same position that I was in my previous job, but I was there because I advocated for myself. I asked the questions, I was vocal about it, and I let people know of what my goals were. And that is why I'm here. Had I decided to be silent about what I wanted, had I decided my doubts to win over, there possibly could be another woman or a man, whatnot, standing where I am today because they would have been more vocal about it.
That's great.
And
Thank
you were worthy of that.
Beautiful. And then we'll end it with this. What do you hope someone listening takes from your story?
I would say one of the biggest lessons I learned just throughout my journey are differences, as I said before, don't necessarily have to be a disadvantage. It's all about how you decide to go about it, and your differences can instead be an advantage. So whatever that may be for anyone listening, there is opportunity, and it's all about how you, decide to, use your skills. For me, my appearance, the community that I belong to, and my ability to speak Spanish was something that I definitely used to my benefit to get me to where I am today. Even though many of the times I didn't maybe know what I was doing, I just believed that I could.
Thank you so much for that. That was beautiful. Noemi, I want to thank you again for your time, sharing a little bit of your story with us and sharing all the wisdom that you have.
Thank you so much, Patricia. I've had a lot of fun, and like I said, for anyone back at home, sí se puede. Sí se puede.
Thank you for tuning in. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, follow, and share this with someone who might need it. Stay tuned for the next one.